Alright, so these three angle measures, (30 degrees or pi over 6, 45 degrees or pi over 4, and 60 degrees or pi over 3. They're all in the first quadrant. They're very common angle measures, and they're called reference angles. And we can use those reference angles with a couple of charts that I'm about to draw up here to find values of their multiples. Okay? The two charts that we're going to use, the first chart will tell you about the positive or negative sign of your answer. So it will tell you if your answer is going to be positive or negative. Alright, this chart means that all 6 trig functions are positive in the first quadrant. In the second quadrant, sine and its reciprocal, cosecant, yes, cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, if you haven't figured that out yet. Sine and its reciprocal cosecant are positive. Every other trig function evaluated at an angle measure in the second quadrant will give you a negative answer. In the third quadrant, tangent and its reciprocal, cotangent, are positive. Every other trig function evaluated at an angle measure in the third quadrant, negative. And in the fourth quadrant, cosine and its reciprocal, secant, are positive. Every other trig function evaluated in the fourth quadrant will give you a negative answer. Okay. An easy way to remember this chart, the way that I learned to remember it, I'm going to tell you two different ways. Salty C, everybody knows the C is salty, right? S-all, sol, T, C, salty C. That's how I remembered it. It just made the most sense to me. I've also heard students say, if you can remember the small sentence, all students take calculus, which they don't, but all students take calculus. That's counterclockwise from the first quadrant. You could learn it like that. But salty C just makes sense. All right. The other chart we're going to use is called the reference angle chart. And this chart will help you figure out the multiples of a reference angle. Or, if you have an angle, you can figure the reference angle out using this chart. So, this chart goes as following. If an angle measure is in the first quadrant, we're just going to call it theta. That's the reference angle. To get its multiple in the second quadrant, you say pi minus theta, or 180 degrees minus theta. To get the angle measure or its multiple in the third quadrant, you say pi plus theta, or 180 degrees plus theta. And to get the multiple in the fourth quadrant, you say 2 pi minus theta, or 360 degrees minus theta. So this chart can be used a couple of different ways. One is to find the multiples of the reference angle. The other is if you have an angle measure in the second, third, or fourth quadrant, you can set it equal to whatever formula is here and find the reference angle. So let me show you what I'm talking about, because it can be used two different ways. It's very important that you understand both. Let's say that I want to consider the angle measure 30 degrees. And I want to know what are the multiples of 30 degrees in the different quadrants. So then what I would do is I'd come to the second quadrant. And in the second quadrant, I would say 180 degrees minus the reference angle, 30 degrees. That's 150. So an angle measure of 150 degrees in the second quadrant is a multiple of 30 degrees. If I want to get the angle measures multiple in the third quadrant, I would say 180 degrees plus 30 degrees. 180 degrees plus theta. So that's 210 degrees. So 210 degrees is the multiple of 30 degrees in the third quadrant. And if I want to get its multiple in the fourth quadrant, I'll say 360 degrees minus 30 degrees, which is 330 degrees. So the multiple of 30 degrees in the fourth quadrant is 330 degrees. So that's one way this table can be used. It's not used that way very often, but it can be used that way. The way that it's usually used would be to work out a problem like this. Let's say that I wanted to know what is the cosine of 210 degrees. But I don't know what 210 degrees is similar to. I don't know what it's a multiple of. So pretend that I haven't covered this stuff over here yet. So without using a calculator, what we have to do is we have to figure out the reference angle for 210 degrees. So we have to know which quadrant is 210 degrees located in. And so since the negative x-axis is 180 degrees and the negative y-axis corresponds to 270 degrees, 210 degrees is between those two, and it's in the third. Alright, so since this angle measures in the third quadrant, look at the formula in the third quadrant. 180 degrees plus theta. So what we say is 180 degrees plus theta, the reference angle, equals 210 degrees. And by using this formula, I can figure out the reference angle for 210 degrees. So if I solve for theta, I have to subtract 180 degrees from both sides of the equation. And I get theta is equal to 30 degrees. So that means the reference angle for 210 degrees is 30 degrees. Now, which point do we associate with 30 degrees or pi over 6? Square root of 3 over 2, 1/2. This is for 30 degrees. Okay? Now, so for the cosine of 210 degrees, we're going to use the point square root of 3 over 2, 1/2 to get the number part of our answer. And we're going to use the salty C chart to tell us if our answer is supposed to be positive or negative. So, since you told me we were in the third quadrant, is cosine positive or negative in the third quadrant? Negative. So our answer is going to be negative. Now, cosine, we associate that with the x-coordinate for a point on the unit circle. The x-coordinate for 30 degrees is square root of 3 over 2. And so that's how we can use these charts to work out a trig function evaluated at one of these common angle measures multiples.